So, so anyway, welcome to all of you. As I said earlier, all of you are not from Lehigh Presbytery, and we're glad that you're here wherever you are and wherever you're from. My name is Rhonda Cruzy. I am the transitional presbytery leader for Lehigh, and I've been here since September, and I had no idea what I was getting into when I took this position. I want to open with prayer, and then I'm going to introduce our guests, and then they will briefly talk about what they're doing and around COVID and the work that they're doing, and if there's one nugget that they want to make sure they pass along, what that might be to all of you church leaders. And then we'll open it up for questions. And at that time, if you could put your questions in the chat, use the chat function, that would make it easier for us to relay those messages, those questions on to Rich and Bill and Lisa, although I'm not sure if Lisa's here yet. So I don't think so. Anyway, so let's start with prayer. Holy God, we come before you humbled by the experience of coronavirus and the lockdown. Our world has been stopped in its tracks, and so much of what we have taken for granted has suddenly become uncertain. So many of the plans that we made for this year have not come to pass. And we confess that we don't like the sense of not being in control, of not knowing where we're going, and of not being able to see an ending to this. Remind us, oh God, that through all of it, you are with us. You hold us in your hands, and you are guiding us. We give you thanks for those people to whom you've given the gifts and the wisdom and the courage to work towards solutions for coronavirus, for treatments and a vaccine. We thank you for those people to whom you've given the gifts and the wisdom and the courage to lead us through coronavirus as difficult decisions are made. Bless our time together today, that we may learn from one another, grow in our knowledge and our faith, and renew our trust in your abiding presence. Amen. All right, welcome to those who have just joined us, and I'm happy to introduce our guest speakers, I guess. Rich, and your last name is pronounced Jorth? Yeah, I asked.
There we are.
There you are.
Yorth is Y-O-R-T-H.
Yorth, okay.
Yes.
And Rich is received his PhD from Columbia, and he's a retired virologist with 35 years of experience in the pharmaceutical industry, a recognized expert in vaccine development, and currently working with PATH, which is part of the Gates Foundation, is that correct, on a coronavirus vaccine.
Yes.
In his spare time, he's an elder at First Pres Bethlehem, and serves as their Presbytery commissioner. Lisa Allgood, are you here? I don't think she's here yet. Bill Bartlett received his PhD in biochemistry with a focus on immunology from Dartmouth Medical School. Spent 4 years as a postdoc fellow at the Medical College of Virginia, and has been at, and I don't know how to pronounce this either, Sanofi Pasteur. Is that close enough? For 22 years, currently as a deputy director in the Global Clinical Immunology Department. And Bill is an elder currently on session at First Easton. So, like I said, each of them I've asked to introduce the work they're doing in the area of COVID research or how you're addressing the virus in your work. And then, if you could give us a piece of information that you believe that we should have, and then we'll open it up for questions. And again, use the chat function to submit your questions. So, Rich, go ahead.
Hello, everybody. I'm glad to see so many of you are interested in COVID-19. Before I talk about the work I'm doing, I would like to throw out a couple key messages as we think about worshiping together. Now, I know at First Pres, we've decided to suspend worship indefinitely indoors, but we're trying an outdoor worship service. And the main reason is that there's more and more evidence, and I think some of you would keep up with the news, that the virus is spread by aerosol. And that is not a surprise to me, being an influenza virologist for many years. That's how influenza is spread. In fact, when you look at the relative contribution of aerosol versus droplet, and there's not a clear distinction between the two, and transmission via touching things. Transmission via touching things can be as little as 6% to 30% of the total transmission. All the rest is through the air. And so I cringe when I hear about some congregations saying, oh, we wear masks when we go inside, and then when we sit down in the pews, we take them off. And the thing about aerosols is that they linger in the air for up to an hour or more, and especially in poorly ventilated rooms. So the aerosol can go, there's evidence that it goes as much as 18 feet away. If like there's a study in a diner and a study in an airplane where people 18 feet away got infected. And so if you do want to have church services inside, certainly you need to demand on masks, not make it optional. Masks should be mandatory. Now the evidence is just coming out that masks not only protect other people, but they also protect you. And of course, if you think about it logically, even a non-virologist, are masks, are there one-way channels? You know, they only prevent going out. No, it prevents going out and coming in. So you protect everyone wearing a mask. And masks, depending on the mask and the fit, can prevent between 50% and maybe 90, 95% of the transmission. And even when you do wear masks, and if for the few people who might get infected, it seems early evidence is that they are less likely to have as severe an infection. So I just want to emphasize the masks. And the other thing I tell people all the time is you know, when they talk about aerosol versus droplets, well, if you're a virus, viruses aren't that smart, okay? If you're a virus infecting somebody's nose and they're talking, and just by talking or breathing, they're putting out droplets and aerosols, the viruses aren't going to say, okay, boys, let's all jump on the large particles, you know, not on the small particles. The viruses are in all particles. And the reason it's taken so long for this to come out is it's hard to prove this. And so there's an article I'll send Rhonda, and if you can look it up, in today's New York Times. I just got it this morning and said, wow, this is perfect. By a professor who's been doing this for many years at the Virginia Tech. Her name is Lindsay, L-A-N-S-E-Y-M-A-R-R. And I'll send a link to Rhonda. And so I think that she makes a very good case for the aerosols. And there's a lot of nice references in there that you can, depending on how deeply you want to dig. But the bottom line is 6 feet is probably, even with masks indoors, is a little risky. I prefer 10 feet or more. The further, the better. And of course, singing is bad. You probably all heard about the Washington State Choir, where 52 out of 60 got COVID from one patient. And that, and they were sitting further apart, and they weren't shaking hands or hugging, and they weren't, they were using hand sanitizers and all that. So that's one of the clearest indications that it spreads through the air. And so if you do choose to have church services, hopefully you sit far apart, you all insist on wearing masks, and you don't sing. So the question we had at First Pres Bethlehem was, what kind of service is that? So maybe we'll do better if we go online. So I'll jump into what I'm doing briefly, and then give Bill and Lisa, if she's here, a chance as well. But what I've been doing, working for PATH, which is a link to the Gates Foundation, is I've been helping third world countries and second world countries prepare for a pandemic, which we all thought was going to be flu. It turned out it wasn't flu this time. And so what we were doing is building egg-based facilities because flu is best grown in eggs. And so all these facilities are around the world ready to go for a flu pandemic. And the problem was coronavirus doesn't grow in eggs. So what we did is we contacted a group of really good genetic engineers at Mount Sinai, and they took the S protein, the key protein of SARS, and they plugged it into a virus that grows very well in eggs. And so now we ship this virus to several other manufacturers who are working with us. And now they can use their egg facilities that are just sitting there, and they can use them to make coronavirus vaccine. And I think it's particularly important because some of these countries don't have any other viable options. And so now they can use facilities in their countries to make coronavirus vaccine. So there's lots of challenges with corona vaccine work, and if you are curious, you can ask me about it in the question period. So I think I've taken enough time, and I'll go back to Rhonda.
Well, I'll just turn it over to Bill. I believe you're unmuted, so
yes.
Go for it.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I am with Sanofi Pasteur, which is one of the large vaccine companies globally. Before I get too far, I do have to say that the opinions I'm going to be giving today are my own, not necessarily those of my employers. I'm only speaking on behalf of myself, but based on the experience that I have. As Rhonda said, I've been with Sanofi Pasteur for 22 years, and previous I was involved in other aspects of immunological research and development of immunological tests. The work that I do now, COVID-related and non-COVID-related, involves development and validation, which is a very important word when you're talking about tests. The development and validation of tests for evaluation of the immune response to candidate vaccines. So in this case, that means development of test methods for evaluation of the immune response against COVID candidate vaccines. Sanofi Pasteur has two different approaches that the company globally is taking for development of a vaccine. One is protein-based, uses molecular biological techniques to express a protein similar in many ways to what Rich has talked about, to produce an antigenic protein that is taken from COVID, and that's going to be used in the overall vaccine. The second approach is an mRNA vaccine, and in technology, it's similar to what you may have seen on the news about the Moderna vaccine, which has been under development and under testing. Not the same vaccine, but a similar technology in that both use mRNA. With regard to some important messages relating to COVID and responses from a congregational perspective, much of what Rich said goes exactly the same for First Pres Easton. We have also made the decision to be strictly online, which has led to many bumps in the road as we develop that ability. But we still feel that in a combination of safety and the worship experience, that was our best approach. I agree with Rich. Mask wearing would be mandatory. One of the concerns that we had was enforcement of that and how we would do that if we had someone show up who refused. And singing and group statements, repeating the Apostles' Creed, statements of faith, as a congregation in ways similar to singing, though perhaps not quite as extreme, also generates a lot of aerosols. So we were concerned that if we did that, even if we socially distanced, at least in our worship space, the number of people that we would be able to have involved did not make it sufficiently meaningful that the risk was worth it. Immunologically, COVID is new to our immune systems. So what we have as our innate immune system is not very well equipped to fight it right now. Hence the great need for the vaccine, whichever manufacturer is able to produce, and the likelihood is extremely high that we will need multiple manufacturers to produce effective vaccines in sufficient quantities. A global pandemic requires a global response, which means a lot of vaccine. But we do have some tools, and those tools very much begin with masks, with social distancing, hand sanitizing and hand washing. I think, as Rich said very well, is helpful, but I do think that consideration of aerosols and exposure to aerosols is more important. Wearing masks and staying separate in terms of a physical distancing, I have to say, I've been disturbed by the use of the term social distancing. If one thing we've learned over the last 5 months is we need to be socially active, we need to be socially engaged, but physically distance. But social distancing was the phrase that we've been using for years, as Rich well knows, in all types of pandemic preparedness. So distancing from others and wearing masks, I think, are the two most important things, especially consideration of who we will be interacting with, and knowing that everyone we are interacting with, we are, in a way, interacting with everyone that they have interacted with. And then the same applies for the people that we subsequently interact with. So the web of interactions, the web of contacts expands quickly. So all in all, it requires us to take this seriously and be committed to doing our best to protect not only ourselves, but others. And
Great.
with that, I'll turn it back over to Rhonda.
Thanks. Lisa is with us now, and we're really glad to see that she's beat Zoom. She's got it. So, Lisa,
Yes.
go ahead and talk about the work that you're doing and what are some things that you would really like to emphasize.
And I apologize, gang. There's been thunderstorms here, and so for some reason Zoom wasn't participating. So thank you for having me. Very brief background. I am an immunologist by training. I graduated from the University of Medicine and Dentistry way back in 1985. Spent 36 years in the pharmaceutical industry, primarily doing immunological research at first. I'm an old person, so back then with rhinovirus and what came to be known later as HIV, back then it was HTLV 3 and 4, but also moved very quickly into clinical research and regulatory work, working with boards of health on lots of different countries. For the last year and a half, I've been the executive presbyter for the Presbytery of Cincinnati, which is God's really funny sense of humor, putting me as an executive presbyter in the middle of a pandemic as a retired immunologist. I'm not sure, Bill, I heard the very end of yours and some of the definitions of the vaccines. I think that's correct. Rich, I've heard you speak before, but I don't know what you've said to this group. I think the only thing I'm going to add on a vaccine is that while the virus is an mRNA virus, it's a messenger RNA virus, single strand, to my understanding, there is no mRNA vaccine that is approved. So this is a new technology. Both Moderna and Pfizer have those. Both are progressed now to the large-scale phase 3 clinical trials. That's a good thing. I know people in both companies, they're stockpiling vaccine now, so they intend to have hundreds of thousands of doses available as soon as FDA approves it. And the first people that will get that vaccine will likely be first responders, medical personnel. It's not likely going to be the people who are sitting in your pews. So as soon as a vaccine becomes available, it doesn't mean it's a free-for-all again. It's going to take us a very long time to assess how long that vaccine is in place. There's a lot of chatter out there that says we could be taking annual coronavirus vaccines just like you take an annual flu vaccine. Not so much because it mutates, but because apparently the antibody response isn't as strong as some of the other antibody responses for other vaccines. I think it's also possible that no one vaccine type will cover it. mRNA might, but there are other recombinant vaccines, attenuated vaccines that actually might end up becoming a cocktail. So it's a really complicated kind of study. I think most of the information that I've been pushing out to my pastors, and they're probably up to here with science at this point, is really more about, and Rich, you may have addressed this, how infectious this virus is. Right now, unless you're in a hotspot part of the country, and you are getting there again, I think, the R value, the reproducing value, at least in Ohio right now, is below 1, which means the virus is not spreading rapidly. You go to some place like Florida, it's about at a 4. And the way to think about that is any one person, and Bill sort of alluded to this, any one person infects on average another 4 people. And then those 4 people infect another 4 people. And those 16 people infect another. And you can see how exponentially, how quickly this virus spreads. So all of the admonitions you've heard about wear a mask, physical distancing, no singing, think of singing as an extended 4-minute cough, which expels aerosols 18 feet for 4 minutes solid. Some of the data that we've seen is that the peak chance of being infected is if you're exposed to somebody at that kind of rate for no more than 15 minutes. So if you're back in a sanctuary and your services are lasting a half hour, you've already hit the peak ability for exposure. I think the other thing to keep in mind, again, Rich, you may have touched on this, is while this is a respiratory virus in the sense that that's generally how it infects, it is not a respiratory virus in terms of its consequences. The neurological consequences of these that are emerging are frankly really scary and have not really been seen at this level in any other vaccine. Other coronaviruses have shown similar kinds of symptoms, but not like this. In young people, all the way up to the ones that are most susceptible at the top end of the age range, we're seeing psychosis, we are seeing seizures, we're seeing strokes, we're seeing cognitive dysfunction, and it's lasting for several months, and we don't know how long it's going to last. It affects the liver, it affects the kidneys, it affects the GI tract. There's data out now that says it affects the pancreas and can actually cause diabetes, as opposed to just having diabetes be a predisposing condition. It's a really nasty and very quirky and poorly understood virus, and it's not one you want to mess with. The other question that keeps coming up as sessions wrestle with, do we go back or not, particularly now that it's in the middle of summer, is air conditioning. There is only one published study out of a restaurant in Wuhan. And if you've ever been to Wuhan, it's the tropics. It's not a great place. It is the incubation place for viruses. But it was a closed environment, small restaurant, no airflow other than an internal air conditioner. And they actually mapped the one person who was infected at that point and how many other people all around that individual who then became infected. And I've had people say, yeah, but my air conditioner has a UV filter or a HEPA filter and all these really cool technologies. But think about what an air conditioner does. An air conditioner, the air leaves the air conditioner, goes through that filter. For the first 30 seconds, it's clean. And as soon as it goes down and is dispersed over people who are sitting, it's no longer clean air. And if it's dispersed over somebody who's infected, you now have recirculated, exhaled air from an infected person that's circulating around that sanctuary. And so that's why the admonition, if you've got windows that can open, leave those open and let the air flow in a single direction that is replenished air instead of air conditioning that's circulating within a closed space. Nobody likes those kinds of admonition, but I agree. No singing, limit the recitative kinds of work that you're doing. No air conditioning, no ceiling fans. That's the same idea. Keep it short. Keep social distancing, physical distancing. Keep the masks on, and limit the number of things that can be touched. So limit the number of places people can go in your sanctuary. Make sure you have cleansing procedures for things like doorknobs and light switches. The virus has been shown to last up to 4 days on impermeable surfaces, metals, and 1 to 2 days on permeable surfaces. If you can take the hymnals out, take the hymnals out. It's just another source of contamination. I don't know if that covers between the three of us all of the questions, but I'm happy to go into more, including treatments that are emerging right now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to let folks put questions in chat. If you have specific questions, you can, if you have them directed to one person or another, make that clear. But otherwise, go ahead and chat away.
I'd just like to say, Rich, again, that it's nice that I think we're almost totally agreeing, the three scientists here, and we're complimenting each other. And so we're not going to have any debates here. We're all on the same page.
Yeah. Hey, Lisa, the other day when I was on a call with you, you gave the statistics that for every 100 people who are infected, one person will die, and the happen.
Yes, I can do that again. So the death rate is getting a little bit better because the treatments have gotten better and people are being tested at a higher rate. So that's helped. There are several different kinds of treatments at different parts of the infection that will alleviate infection. It won't cure. And you have to understand too that the people who are being treated are really severely ill. So the kinds of responses you're seeing are from 28 days in the hospital down to 24, not I'm better in 3 days. But the statistics go like this. Right now, the death rate is about 1 per 100, so 1%. That's 10% higher than a general flu, just to put that in perspective for you. But for every one person who dies, we have 19 more that are hospitalized. And if you think about just the population of the US is about 3.2 billion. So that means you've got, you know, I don't know, you've got, you've got 3.2 million dead. Now you've got 19 times that in the hospital. So you've got like 62 million people in the hospital. For every one person who dies, 18 people have long-term or permanent heart damage. For every one person that dies, 10 people have long-term or permanent lung damage. And I can tell you, I have seen CAT scans of young athletes, cross-country runners who have permanent lung damage in the bottom of their lungs because of the infiltrate and the cytokine storms that come out of these kinds of infections. For every one person who dies, there are 3 who will have strokes, who will leave them permanently impaired. For every one person that dies, there will be 2 that has some form of permanent neurological deterioration, and another 2 that have some form of long-term or permanent cognitive dysfunction from this. The mechanisms aren't known for the neurological. They're not really finding virus in the nervous system, although there is precedent for that. But what they do believe is that it could either be part of the immune response that ends up crossing the blood-brain barrier, or it actually could be virus in the nervous system. And they're not clear on what that looks like. So, you know, you hear the death rate, and I've heard people say, oh, it's not that bad. Well, but the stress on the healthcare system is huge. And the cost that comes with these long-term and permanent disabilities is also huge, just not only from a resource standpoint, but from a healthcare cost standpoint. So it's like I said, a quirky virus, and it's scary.
So one of the questions is, what is the best way to have airflow if we return to the sanctuary? And I don't know who wants to answer that, but
Keep the windows open, keep the doors open, and let the air flow in one direction. Let natural air flow. That's the best thing that you can do. It's as close as you're going to be to getting outside.
And there are studies that show that actually having ozone, the virus doesn't like. Ozone comes in with the fresh air. Some people actually get ozonator machines, and also UV light. I heard of some restaurants that actually put UV lights in the ceiling. You can't aim them at people, but UV kills the virus. That's why being outside is so much safer. That's one reason being outside is so much safer.
Right.
Okay. Bill, did you have something to add?
I was just going to agree.
Oh, okay. How would any of you respond to those who are saying that exposure to the virus will increase the immune systems?
No, the immune response to this virus is very short-lived and very weak. And the fewer symptoms you have to remember that current estimates say 40% of the people who actually have the virus have no symptoms at all. So you don't know who's in front of you that might be infectious. And in fact, the infectivity period begins 2 or more days, but usually 2 days before anybody even shows symptoms. Sweden is on the record books as having tried for herd immunity. Herd immunity is defined as 70% or more of the population that has an immune response. So they actually let the populace go, did not discourage congregation, so they didn't encourage physical distancing, did not mandate masks, and they have the highest death rate by 2-fold over any other country in Europe. So that is not a good way to go. We have not achieved herd immunity in the US. The immune response naturally doesn't appear to last much more than 3 to 4 months, which is why boosters for the vaccine are going to be important. And we're at about perhaps 10% of our population as tested having been infected. So we're nowhere near herd immunity.
But of course, the second infections would likely be less severe. And also, I like to say that some of the vaccines that are being developed use something called adjuvants that are boosters.
Right.
And this could be very much like shingles. Shingles, you can get a case and a year later you get another case naturally. But if you take that shingles vaccine, the newer one, Shingrix, that has a strong adjuvant in there, you get 2 doses, then at 95% stops shingles. And so it is possible to get stronger immunity with a good vaccine than you get with natural infection.
And that's, Rich, you bring up a really good point, because it's not yet known whether or not this virus becomes dormant. Most coronaviruses, well, all coronaviruses to date have not. This one is a really different virus. So if you think about the virus that causes shingles, it's the chickenpox virus. You get chickenpox as a kid, but it stays in your body. It just stays quiescent. And then it erupts later. It's the same as the herpes virus. Once it's in your body, it never leaves. It just stays quiescent, and other things will trigger it to come back. There is some supposition that that could be the case with the coronavirus. I haven't really seen anything that convinces me that's true yet. But if that's the case, the other thing that's not known is, can you be reinfected, since natural immunity is so weak? Again, no real evidence for that, but it's possible. And in that case, you know, both of those second infections or second iteration of the virus could be stronger in terms, if you're not immune or if there's not a vaccine.
One of the things that will be interesting to find out, which we don't know yet, unfortunately, is what the recall response would be.
Right.
And if, as Rich mentioned, subsequent booster initiates the immune system to come on faster than it did in the initial exposure. That's commonly the case. We don't know if that is this time. And scientifically, that's just an interesting question. From a human standpoint, it's a critically important question that we just don't have the answer to yet.
Right.
I want to come back to somebody, Lisa, you said something about current treatments, and you could talk about that, but somebody wants to know, what age should children wear masks?
Somebody put out a great video about what kindergartners would do with masks, and it was hilarious. You know, on their head, in the back, around their ears, wearing it as a beard, putting crayons in their nose and making it out to be walrus tusks. It's tough. I think most state, not mandates, but most state recommendations that I've seen say 8 and up. And you all know from having kids in your sanctuary, it's really hard to get a little kid not to run up and hug you. So actually, some of the guidance that has been given out is, if you start meeting, even if you're outdoors, have the little ones stay at home, because they won't know why they can't run up and hug their, you know, favorite Uncle Bill. And they probably won't keep the masks on. That said, I have seen a couple of the preschools here, and the kids are wearing masks, and they are perfectly okay with it. So I guess you never really know.
I think it's a matter of training. You have to kind of work with the kids, and it certainly is better if kids can wear the masks. Everyone would be safer.
The answer I was going to say was as young as possible, where they can use the masks properly. So, which is another way of saying it depends.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So a few different people have asked about current treatments. So what's out there?
So, yeah, Rich, I don't know, you want to take a crack at this one first, and then I can pile on?
Oh, sure. I'll say a little bit. Well, the remdesivir, there is some good data that shortens the time in the hospital. And I'm very optimistic about that, because that was the first trial was done late in infection. Now, just like Tamiflu for flu and some of the other drugs, you need to stop the virus as soon as it gets there, because if you wait for it to spread throughout the body, it's a little late. These stop the virus from spreading within your body. And so now there's trials going on where they're trying this to give it earlier. And otherwise, it's like closing the barn door after the horses have gotten out.
Yeah, so remdesivir is an immune booster, if you will. And so giving it early in an infection will actually increase the immune response to fight it, which is how it works.
It's also an antiviral. It affects the
It's an antiviral, right?
Yeah.
But it also it boosts the T cell response.
Good.
Dexamethasone is an immune suppressant. So giving that later in the infection actually helps overcome if there's a cytokine storm, if the immune system overreacts, that actually works. There's also a Japanese mRNA mutation drug that's out there that they're looking to see whether or not they can change the virulence of the virus once it's in your system. I haven't really seen very much data on that one. I will say the convalescent plasma stuff has not shown to work, and it's partly probably because of the weakened immune response that convalescent plasma might have.
And also there's dexamethasone as another treatment, and that works by suppressing the cytokine storm you probably heard about. And that's how 1918 flu used to kill people too, is that your body excretes these, what are called cytokines as an immune response, but it overdoes it in the case of these viruses. And so often the virus doesn't have to infect your various organs. It's just the cytokines that you produce that are shutting down your kidneys and everything else. And so dexamethasone, I believe now is some good data that suppresses cytokine storm and helps survival.
Exactly right.
So some churches, as you've said, First Easton and First Bethlehem both are closed indefinitely. Some are opening in September, some not until 2021, they've said. If you're considering opening, what are the best guidelines?
In Cincinnati, I have probably the whole gamut. I've got rural churches that are out at the edge of Appalachia and down in Kentucky, and I've got big urban suburban churches. Some of the big urban suburban churches have sanctuaries that are so big that they can safely social distance, physical distance, 50 to 100 people. Some of them are not that big. Most of the bigger churches have either reclosed or never opened and have said almost corporately that they will not open or will not consider opening until 2021. The bigger churches in New York that I'm familiar with, because that's where I come from, and Chicago have said they're not even going to consider opening until Lent of 2021, until after they know what the vaccine situation is. The rural churches that I have gone back, but they're outside. They have cornfields and big parking lots, and they can have people bring their own camp chairs, and they can distance by about 8 to 10 feet. Once it starts to get cold here in Cincinnati, that's going to be a problem. For those churches that have gone back, what we've told them is no air conditioning, no ceiling fans. You're gonna have to suck that up. What we have told them is if you really have no windows that open or no doors you can leave open for ventilation, use the air conditioner for 24 hours before to cool the sanctuary if it's small enough that you can do that, and then turn it off so there's no airflow during the service, and then you could turn it back on after that. Obviously, masks should be mandatory, even though most states haven't made that mandatory yet. We've just started. The officiants, if they can physically distance far enough, can take the mask off, and that's actually part of some of the state mandates. No singing, or if you're going to have singing, have 1 or 2 soloist duets, physically distance. No wind instruments, no brass instruments, nothing that's going to project. I think Bill said before, keep the recitations down to a minimum, the responsive readings down to a minimum. No fellowship, no passing of the peace, limited anything that can be touched multiple times. So offering plates should be left at the back of the sanctuary. Let people put it in as they come in, but don't pass them, or have online giving, even better. Communion is always a tricky one. We've told people no intinction. You don't want anything that's going to be touched multiple times. So you don't want the wine to be touched multiple times. Most of the churches here have had people bring their own, and they're free to bring wine or water, whatever liquid works. We've even done communion virtually. We do that all the time now. Or Use the prepackaged ones, which aren't great, but you can use the prepackaged ones. But other than that, don't, just limit passing. Bulletins are in the back laid at a table, so people pick up their own and take them home. Nobody passes them out. Greeters don't shake hands and don't pass out the bulletins. Same with if you are going to sing, and I hesitate to say this, pre-print the hymn and leave it in the back, so don't use the hymnals, but we are really strongly discouraging singing. And I think I've covered everything that we've talked about. What I leave out?
Bill, were you going to say something?
I was just thinking, I don't believe there's anything that you left out there.
Someone said that they have a plan to have someone holding the juice and wearing a mask and wearing gloves, pre-dipping wafers into the juice and then giving it to people and putting it in their hands. Is that safe?
I saw that, and my opinion is that's pretty good, but the person who's going to put the wafer in the hand still has to get pretty close to that other person.
Yeah.
And so we decided if we were going to open up, which we're not going to do, we would just do communion virtually and not have communion in person. You want to do all these things, but when you consider, Rhonda sent out something a while ago about this church. They thought they did everything right, and yet they had all these people come down with COVID. And the question is, do you want that on your conscience? If somebody in your congregation comes out, is it worth the risk?
I think the other thing to say about that is, and we've had a lot of conversations about this in Cincinnati, is removing the mystique of communion, that your own bread and your own juice is just fine. And in fact, if you're saying your own prayers over your own elements as the pastor is saying the words of institution, that's a really good habit to get into anyway. And so actually we found that people have really enjoyed preparing their own communion because it actually has meaning to them.
Does a preacher need to have a plastic shield in front of them?
It's a good question. It depends on how far away they are. So I can tell you one of our churches is the pulpit is up on a dais, so it's 8 feet up off the general floor. And we're Presbyterian, so nobody sits in the front pew, which means you're at least 60 feet away from somebody. That pastor, I would say, probably doesn't need a shield and probably doesn't even need a mask, except when they come off the dais. If you're close, if you're used to preaching from the floor of the sanctuary, or there's just not that much room to distance, a plastic shield like they have at a grocery store or Target now will help. The thing to remember, though, is the face masks that people are wearing. If you're wearing those without a real mask, you're not inhibiting airflow. All you're doing is preventing any droplets from getting on your face. So that is not a substitute for a mask.
Yeah, ideally, if you want to be really careful, you put the shield on and the mask.
Exactly.
The shield kind of reduces it getting into your eyes, and now they're thinking it might get through your eyes as well.
Right.
Couple more questions. Number of churches have preschools in their buildings that are getting ready to start back up?
Yeah. I mean, I would honestly say it depends on the proximity of that preschool and how those rooms are used in conjunction with a sanctuary or with a service. If it's the same room, I would say that's a major problem. It also depends on what the liability of the church is relative to this preschool. So if the preschool is renting space from the church, both the church and the presbytery should be indemnified, first of all. But, and if it's a separate space, then they're responsible for it. I mean, one of the things, if you're going back into a sanctuary, you want to do is limit access to as many places in the building by your congregants as possible. That includes bathrooms. It includes the kitchen and the fellowship hall and any other hallways or other classrooms. You really want to try and keep them to one room that you can control. Preschools are tough. I don't know that I've got good guidance on that one.
Well, there's a couple things you can do in preschools, and that is to keep them in pods, keep the same people in contact with each other, and of course, try to get them to wear masks. I think that's the only thing we can suggest, and try to keep them separate. Like if they're eating and they have to take their mask off, spread them out. You know, like maybe if you have a picnic table, one on one end looking one way and the other end, and that's it for a picnic table.
Yeah, the harder thing in a preschool, honestly, is the things that are touched. You know, because little kids want to manipulate things. That's how they learn. They want to play. And, you know, they're not great about covering their cough or their sneeze. And so to try and literally disinfect everything in a preschool so that it's not contagious, that's, I think, where the biggest problem for kids is. That and the fact that they don't know what physical distancing means or why. So I think as Bill and Rich said before, early training is really important.
Well, I wanted to jump into transmission by touching. And that is, if we were to have a church service indoors, I am advising that you don't have to wipe down the whole sanctuary. You don't have to put bleach on the pews and all that stuff.
Right.
Because if nobody uses that room for a week, the virus will die. On soft surfaces, I think the CDC is saying maybe a day. And on harder surfaces, 3 or 4 days. And the thing is, if you think about surface transmission, you have some virus, you cough it under a surface, or you touch a surface with your hands. So you lose a lot there. So somebody else touches that surface. They're not going to get all the virus that went on the surface off. A lot of it's going to stay stuck. Viruses are sticky. And so then when you touch it, it gets on your finger, and then you transmit it to your face. And again, you lose a lot of the virus. And so there's not a whole lot of virus left by the time it gets to your mouth or your nose. I've actually done studies like this when I worked at Sanofi, where you paint virus, flu virus, which is similar. You paint it on the surfaces and you take swabs and you see how much you can get off. And it's amazing on soft surfaces, such as food or cloth or something. It's amazing how difficult it is to get virus back when you're trying.
But you should still wash your hands.
Oh, yeah.
The churches, and First Bethlehem is one of them, that has a small group, the pastor and the band maybe, or the liturgists up on the chancel or whatever, recording, whether either live or when they record. If it's a small group, is that relatively safe?
Again, what's the distance? For those individuals, masking and maintaining 6 or even better, as Rich said, 10 feet between would likely make that pretty safe for those individuals.
But they're singing.
Yeah, so the churches that we have Cincinnati Conservatory of Music. Most of our churches have music scholars. We've told them to stay at least 12 feet apart. So if they're recording, they will have to record into a microphone because they have to maintain physical distancing. If you've ever seen any of the aerosolization videos where they backlight aerosol of somebody who's singing, it's 18 to 24 feet. And like I said, it's like 4 minutes of a sustained cough. So you do want to be really careful. I think the other thing to remember, because there are now indications that there are rapid virus tests being tested. They're not approved yet. That's a point in time. I mean, you can take it one day and you're clear for that day, but you don't know what you are the next day. So it's not like you're clear forever.
What about, there's a couple more that I want to get. What about eyewear? Covering your eyes?
Well, that's just coming in the news these days. I think it's less likely than you breathing it in, getting into your nose or your mouth. But I think there's a possibility. There's that NBC chief medical correspondent who flew in a plane. He wore a mask and everything, but he got it because he thinks he got it through his eye. So it can happen. You all agree, Lisa and Bill?
Yeah, but again, that's that more than 15 minutes sustained exposure. I mean, you know,
Yes.
the fact that you get infected is a function of how many virus particles you're exposed to over a period of time.
Right.
Sue Benich, did you have something?
Yeah, I would just wanted to tell you about First Pres and how we do worship these days. We only have 4 in the church, both at the contemporary and the traditional. We're separated at least 12 feet. And what we do is we record. Dave, our musician, comes in and pre-records the rest of the service, all the music and
Okay.
things like that. So that's how we're staying safe.
Okay, thanks.
That's good.
Okay, we're getting down to, I don't want to keep people, I promised an hour. So what about weddings? Is there a safe way to do that?
Outside. Outside with mask and still at least 6 feet.
And
Yeah.
probably limited in terms of size, number of people.
Yeah, but indoors it should be quite small.
And it is one of the most confusing sets of state mandates, I think, that are out there, because some places have allowed larger gatherings, although that seems to be being reduced now. You know, it's tough. You want pictures with your wedding party if you're actually going to hold the wedding, and that's a panoramic if you've got 8 attendants and they're all 6 feet apart. So it's a tough one. Almost everybody I know has canceled weddings until next year, honestly.
Now, do you want your guests dying? I don't.
Probably not. One last question about using exhaust fans to improve airflow.
I think Lisa addressed that partially before. If you're blowing, if I have COVID and the air is blowing past me to somebody else who's 10 feet away, on the, you know, those people might be worse off. And if there's something like in some airplanes, the airflow goes up, you know, it sucks the air up, that would be fine. But I'd be a little worried about exhaust fans. What do you all think?
I think it depends on how the natural airflow is. So if you've got windows that are open on both sides of the sanctuary and you've got a fan in one side that's drawing the air out, so you're not recycling that air and you're just drawing it out constantly, it's fresh air. I wouldn't want to be the person who's sitting on the downwind side of the person who was infected for 15 minutes, but at least you're not circulating it around so that everybody's looking at it. I mean, there is no good answer on airflow at this point. Fresh is best, you know, just a continual direction instead of circulation. And natural is best, so not recycled air.
Right.
Okay. Well, I want to let you go. We so very much appreciate your sharing with us today and all that you've told us. And I appreciate the fact that you're going to let me share this with others who couldn't make it today. We appreciate your time and your wisdom. Is there any one thing you want to close with, or?
Stay safe. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and overall, it's just not worth it to take those risks to get together in person indoors, in my opinion.
Okay.
Agree.
All right. I think that's unanimous. And thanks to the other Presbytery folks from across Pennsylvania who joined us. And again, I'll get the link out. And Rich, you were going to send an article or something?
I'll send 2 articles that get into some depth and are very, very good for the layman.
Okay. And if either of the other 2 want to include anything that you're aware of, you can send it to me too.
Well, yeah, if I can get copied on Rich's so you don't get duplicates, that would be great.
Okay.
Okay, good.
Great.
Thank you all.
Thank you all so very much. Have a good day.
Bless.
Thank you.
Wash your hands.
Yeah.
Wear a mask.
But yes.